I'd like to start with this extraordinary news that we've now had from the oil people, the oilprice.com, which, by the way, is an extremely reliable website, which basically provides the information from the oil industry. We've always had these debates about whether or not the Saudi oil price war was about, Russia putting the Russians in their place, or MBS trying to conquer the world with oil by obliterating the shale oil industry. Well, the latest information we've had, to my mind, puts this question completely beyond doubt. Apparently, there are now no fewer than 7 super tankers steaming from Saudi Arabia to the United States with 14 barrels of oil. I mean, this is an absolute tidal wave of oil, which is clearly intended to swamp the US with cheap Saudi oil and is intended to hammer the US oil industry. So that, I think, is clearly signposts what MBS and his great oil price war was all about. Despite his denials and protestations, he was out to destroy the shale oil industry. I don't think there's any question about it now.
Well, they've agreed to cuts, right?
Well, there's this talk they have. They've agreed to cuts. There's still discussions going on. We don't quite know what the detail of all of this is. But you go back a few days, there was this big row between Putin and the Saudis. Putin had this meeting with Energy Minister Novak and the other oil executives. He said that the Saudis had started the oil price war to put the shale oil producers, to hammer the shale oil producers. The Saudis said, oh, no, this was not our intention at all. And now we know it must be, because how else do you explain 14 million barrels of Saudi oil pumping there, steaming towards the US? This has been prepared by MBS for ages. He was looking for this opportunity. He was clearly, quietly building up large stockpiles of oil in Saudi Arabia to dump it all on the US market. And he set up this scenario back in February, March to lead to the failure of the OPEC summit meeting. And then he seized on that to get all this huge tidal wave of oil heading towards the US. So this is clearly a cunning plan he's had for a long time, and it's blown up in his face because, as we said, the US and the Russians ganged up against him, and now he's being hit with massive demands for production cuts. The last I've heard is 4 million barrels a day the Saudis will have to cut, which is far more than they were looking to do back in February and March. And on top of all of that, apparently there's a serious talk in the US of tariffs against the Saudis and of trying to find ways to bring legal action on anti-dumping laws. So a cunning plan, never thought through, blown up in his face. And we'll see now what comes out of the oil ministers' meetings, which are currently underway, apparently.
Yeah, but he's sending the oil to the US.
You're sending the oil to the US. It wasn't
what does
about.
That say about the shale?
It explains why I don't know how widely known or understood this is amongst the shale producers, but clearly it shows that MBS and the Saudis still have them in their sights. They tried to destroy them in 2014 to 15 by pumping out oil and lowering the price as far as possible. Now, what they were going to do was shock and awe, flood the United States with cheap oil in order to destroy the shale oil industry. This has clearly been the Saudi agenda. It was the Saudi agenda in 2014-15. It's now, this is the latest attempt to do it, and they're trying to do it. They changed their tactics. As I said, they built up this vast oil stockpile, and then they bought all these, they got all these tankers steaming towards the US with all this huge amount of oil, so as to obliterate the shale oil producers by drowning the US in cheap oil in one big go. Shock and awe and it's only ended up blowing up in his face.
Trump is not going to be happy about this.
Oh, well, he
Wrong time to do all this stuff. Absolutely wrong time.
He isn't happy. He clearly isn't happy. He's incredibly ill-judged. Putin, as usual, was absolutely right when he said what MBS's plans were. And I think we now know. I think this really very strange set of decisions that the Saudis started making after February, March, have now become clear.
Yeah. So sticking with the U.S. before we get to, I think you want to talk about the Bank of England before we get to the Bank of England. Before we get to that, you also mentioned that you want to discuss the 2.3 trillion, the Fed.
Yeah. I mean,
like a second bailout, I guess.
It is a second bailout. I mean, this seems to be more directed at the the smaller businesses. But of course, again, it's using monetary policy to support the economy. I mean, this is becoming on a vast scale. Now, the US can still do it, just about, I think, because it's got the reserve currency, so it can create money. And for the moment, I don't think it's got to worry about it. I don't think it's going to undermine the currency. I don't think it's going to undermine the value of the dollar. But I'm going to say this. I think pumping out money like this, using the Fed as a magic money machine in this fashion, even in an emergency, is going to cause massive malinvestments and distortions in the financial system and ultimately in the larger US economy. Let me give you an example. I mean, the shale oil industry in the United States, for me, is the classic example. I mean, this is an industry that has never made a profit collectively, that's always traded at a loss. It's been able to do it because there is so much liquidity in the US that it's able to sort of keep operating, if you like, by it's a kind of levitation, artificial levitation. And one has to wonder whether this is really an appropriate way to run an economy. Another example for me is the rush towards electric cars. I know this is going to alarm a lot of people. I know a lot of people, maybe some of our viewers, have bought heavily into the electric car technology. But again, if you look at Tesla, it's never run at a profit. And I'm not really sure that this is really how to sustain economies in this fashion. Amazon was another example. It ran for years and years and years on losses because it could, because money is so cheap in the United States. And I'm not saying maybe e-commerce is the right way to go. I mean, in fact, I'm no doubt at all e-commerce is the right way to go. But if you feather bed companies in this fashion by pouring money at them, then of course they lose ultimately their incentive to innovate, to develop, to produce properly, and sometimes they will invest in strange projects. And maybe, as I said, shale oil is a good example, is a good case in point.
Yeah, shale oil is probably a good case, but Amazon is a good case in the other direction, in that they poured a lot of money into it and eventually.
Well, it came together. It came through. But you see, for every success, you have a danger, right. And maybe shale oil. This is separate from the question of what the Saudis are doing, by the way. But maybe shale oil. It looks to me very much like a very, very unstable pyramid, because it never trades profitably. It's never traded profitably. And I've been told by people who should know, including somebody who's an engineer in this thing, that it never can. The nature of the industry is that it entirely depends on very intricate financial engineering, which is entirely the product of these extremely loose money policies. But anyway, that's what the US is doing at the moment. It's now got this huge, as I say, magic money tree, which is the Fed, and it's poured another $2.3 trillion at the economy. I mean, the extent to which this is becoming normalized is extraordinary.
Printing away.
I don't believe it will end well. I mean, I'm not somebody who thinks it's all going to end, tomorrow. I think this is a cumulative thing, but I think it's not wise.
It'll get them through this crisis.
It'll get them through.
It'll get them through the election period,
and
then we'll see from there how far it stretched.
Well, indeed, that's exactly right. It is exactly right. I mean, I should say I'm one of those people who also believes that maybe this crisis is not the place for it. But I believe that recessions are normal parts of an economy's functioning. And what the US has been trying to do now for a long time is it's been trying to avoid recessions. It's got this mindset that recessions are bad in themselves and we must never have them, even though I am a believer in Schumpeterian creative destruction and all this.
It's the short-term election cycle mindset.
That is exactly the point. That's exactly the point.
Yeah, it works on an every 2 years. There's some certain government election, whether it's through Congress, the House, the Senate, or if it's a presidential 4-year cycle.
Yes, absolutely. And bear in mind that all this money printing is not reaching. This may be an exception, but it's not really been reaching the people, the wage earners in the US. So wages in the US have not been rising very fast or even at all. So
for Jeff Bezos and for Elon Musk, they certainly do rise.
They've done very well. They've done very, very well.
Anyway, all right, so talk about money.
It's action. In Europe, we're not getting much. That's a stark difference. But we'll talk about
money printing, Bank of England.
That is on an entirely, that's something completely different. And that is actually really remarkable. It's been so quietly announced here. It was for a short time, about half an hour. It was the lead story in the Financial Times, and then they quickly relegated it. We are also into money printing. But what we're doing now in Britain is that the Bank of England is printing money to cover the British government's operational expenses. So the British government is not paying its way by raising taxes, by borrowing, even borrowing from money markets that have been goosed by QE. It's actually getting money directly from the Bank of England, which is printing it. Now, that is an extraordinary state of affairs, and that is what happens in countries that eventually plunge into hyperinflation. It's what happened in Weimar Germany. In Weimar Germany, there was the German government was printing money in order to keep its operational expenses running, at the same time as its tax revenues had stopped because it had imposed a lockdown on the German economy. As part of a political protest against France. I'm not going to go into the history of it, but that's the classic scenario leading to hyperinflation. For the moment, I don't think this is a danger in Britain, for the simple reason that with nobody able to do very much shopping, there is no demand in the economy. So this money isn't going to lead, in my opinion, to a big decline in the value of the British pound. And in fact, the pound has been pretty stable at the moment, so there's no rush from British money markets or anything like that. But the problem with these sort of things is that once they're started, they become normalized. And though I do think there is a genuine intention to stop this when the corona crisis is done, if it works, the idea will take hold, like it has with QE, that this is part of your normal tools. If you're in trouble, you can get the Bank of England to start printing money for you and cover your costs, and you don't need to worry about it. And at some point, you will need to worry about it, because what was true in Weimar Germany is true in Britain also. There is no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to money or anything else. I really believe that.
All right. Before we get to our video, Alexander, any news on Boris? Very quickly,
well, not much more. The information we're getting is that he's getting better, and is responding well to treatment. And the only reason I'm a bit wary about believing that is that, of course, we were hearing that he was getting better before he was taken into intensive care. I mean, almost right up to the moment when he was taken into intensive care, he was in good spirits and getting better. But look, I don't want to speculate. I don't want to speculate about something I know nothing about.
Check to see if you had any additional information.
I know. For the moment, I'm going to go with what the government is saying. I mean, I think it would be extremely reckless for them to lie to us about something like this. But, you know, I'm not naive. I know governments don't always tell the
That's
truth.
what governments are there for.
It's the government.
All right.
No, I agree.
Let's get to our video.